ഇത് മുഴുവനായിട്ട് കാണില്ലേ? Bharat.
Kranti ma'am. Krishna ma'am. Shall we start, ma'am?
Yeah. We can start, Saurabh, sir.
Yes. Good morning to all. Today again we are going to meet on the topic that we already have discussed in the very first on the very first day regarding international labor law prospects and challenges to be discussed by Dr. Anuja S from India. And second, we have amongst us Dr. Shamtanu Pal from India, dealing with corporate citizenship in the event of COVID-19. So without further delay, I request Kranti ma'am to address the gathering.
Yeah, thank you, Saurabh, sir. Good morning, all. On behalf of Marathwada Mitra Mandal Shankar Rasa Chavan Law College, I heartily welcome today's speakers, Dr. Anuja Madam and Dr. Shamantanuli Pal sir. We all are very pleased to have you here. I'm very thankful to you for sparing your valuable time for our students. During this difficult time also, you have found the time and you have shown your interest to interact with our student. So we are very thankful to you. Ours is Marathwada Mitra Mandal Shankara Savan Law College. Especially the law college is established in the year 2003. The institute is running with an intention of social welfare, and we are all, means as an institute we are always eager to provide social help, social work, and with that intention only we are working right now also. The institute was founded by late Shri Shankar Ravji Chavan. He was former Home Minister of India, and twice he served as Chief Minister of India, Chief Minister of Maharashtra. So like this, gradually the institute got spread in Pune, and now we are having more than 4 campuses and more than 15 institutions. Around 15,000 students are now studying under the umbrella of Marathwada Mitra Mandal in various courses. So the law college is one of the child of Marathwada Mitra Mandal, which is established in the year 2003. We are having 5 years course, 3 years course, post graduation, and around 1200 students are studying under the or in Marathwada Mitra Mandal Shankara Chavan Law College. So slowly but gradually we are progressing, and we are making little efforts to impart good quality legal education, and with all your support I hope we'll be able to do it. This is international, what we can say, international webinar, and under this international webinar we have conducted various guest lectures on various topics, and many speakers have joined till now. I think today is the 6th day of this international webinar, and on this occasion once again I extend my hearty welcome to all guest speakers, participants, and faculty members of Shankaraj Savan Law College. Thank you so much, Saurabh sir. Now over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, again, without further delay, I request Krishna ma'am to introduce our today's guest.
Thank you, Saurabh sir. It is my pleasure to introduce first speaker of the day, Dr. Anuja Sridharan. Ma'am has completed her graduation and post-graduation in law from Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, Kerala. She has done PhD from Cochin University of Science and Technology, Kochi, Kerala. And her topic of PhD was Rights of Women Against the Domestic Violence, the Law and Emerging Challenges. She started her professional career way back in 2000, practiced as an advocate for more than 5 years in various trial courts and High Court of Kerala. She started her academic career in 2005 with extensive teaching and research experience, having worked at Government Law College, Thrissur, Kerala, School of Legal Studies, Cochin University of Science and Technology, Kochi, and more than 9 years of teaching experience at Premier Institute of Law of the country, that is National Law School of India University, Bengaluru. She was a coordinator and program officer for NVIS Center on Environmental Law and Policy at NLSIU, Bengaluru, which was sponsored by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and took a part in many national level deliberations and meetings. Her area of specialization is human rights law. She has, to her credit, 30 articles pertaining to human rights issues of vulnerable sections of population in various journals and 10 chapters in edited books of national and international reputation. The most recent article, Best Interest of Elderly with Dementia, a Human Right Discourse, is published in Journal of NHRC India, the most prestigious Silver Jubilee edition, along with the honorees such as Honorable Dalai Lama, Nobel Awardee Kailash Satyarthi, etc. She has been resource person for prestigious academic and professional platforms, both nationally and internationally. Talking about international exposure, she has delivered a lecture for International Teaching Week organized by Hof University for Applied Sciences, Germany, thrice, and engaged students across the globe on various labor legislations of India. She delivered a lecture in Yunnan University School of Law, Kunming, China, on ADR mechanism in India. She actively participated in Train the Trainer program conducted by Asian Development Bank, IUCN, Academy of Environmental Law, and Open University of Sri Lanka, Colombo, Sri Lanka. And currently, she is working as an assistant professor and coordinator of Center for Labor Studies and Development at Tamil Nadu National Law University, Tiruchirappalli. Ma'am, we are very fortunate to have you for this session. And without further any delay, I now hand over to Dr. Anuja ma'am.
Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible now.
It's my pleasure for being here with all of you today. Thank you so much. First of all, at the outset, my heartfelt gratitude and warm greetings to one of the most prestigious law colleges taking up such wonderful missions forever, in the sense continuing legal education. So thank you so much for making me a part of this program. I first congratulate the institution as such, Marathwada Mitra Mandal, Shankar Chauhan Law College, one of the most prestigious law colleges, and definitely to be appreciated for getting the A grade in the NAC grading system. I congratulate the organizers, the persons behind this particular kind of laurel that have been brought to the institution. Next, it is my humble, heartfelt gratitude and warm greetings to one of the visionaries I could call as Professor Bausab Jadhav sir, to one of the persons who is leading this program, Dr. Kranti Deshmukh. My heartfelt gratitude to you. and none less than the other, Professor Saurabh, who is like a brother to me, my co-speaker, Mr. Shantanu Pal, and we were like a trio for almost all our programs. And they are more than friends, more than brothers to us. And the most important facet of this particular program, I would like to welcome all the fortunate students over there who are listening to this wonderful, intellectually stimulant program. And that's how I would like to call this as intellectually stimulant and professionally competent. So here we are to learn, relearn, and unlearn many concepts that we are there, in the sense what we have already studied and what we are yet to learn about it. So let me start with a humble welcome for all of you for this particular session, which is specifically pertaining to the international labor standards, the prospects and challenges. So what I would like to be talking to you or discussing with you will be what exactly do you mean by international labor standards? And what all could be the kind of sources of knowledge that you can look up for this particular kind of area of law. So if we can start with a wonderful quotation from Arundhati Roy, it's very interesting for all the students over there. She says, there is nothing like helplessness. It is just rather preferably silenced or deliberately unheard. And so I would like to start my session with this particular quotation, with this tune, the ethos that goes behind this particular concern of workers. So when I talk about the international labor standards, it's all about the work done by ILO. It's all about the rights of the workers. It's all about what you would like to know yourself as an employee, yourself as a worker, and yourself being a part of the million workforce within the country. Definitely, many of you, depending on the years that you are into, the batches that you are into, you might have studied labor laws, you might have been into studying public international law, etc. So when you look into the national legislations, you have a whole lot of national legislations that are there specifically related to labor laws. But today, one of the major emphasis that I will be giving will be for international labor standards. So mainly we'll be emphasizing on the activities of ILO. And why? The relevance of this particular topic will be that ILO has turned 100 now by 2019. And that itself shows the relevance and significance of this particular topic. So let me take to you on a journey with me. That's what I would like to call it as to how you understand the concept of international labor standards. So first I'll be talking about the formative period, how the ILO looks like, how it came up, what was its mission, then came upon the concept of globalization, then how it moved on to the values of decent work agenda, and now ending up with the COVID-19 situations. So this would be a small journey, a bird's eye view, a panoramic overview of what with regard to the international labor standards. Let me draw all of your attention to one of the pictures that I've brought within the slides. Actually, I didn't want to bring in slides over here, but when I was told, I was given to understand that the students are the audience over here, I just wanted to make clear as to what I'm trying to make it out to them. Just look at this picture and you can see a whole lot of occupations being picturized over here. You can see the children working, the women working, you can see the bricklins, you can see the factory workers over there, you can see the workers with the kind of different kinds of profiles of work that they are into. Understand, this is just to show before you how the Indian workforce looks like. And the underlying fact will be the fact that comes from the NCEUS report by Arjun Sengupta when it was reported and quoted that Indian workforce consists of 93% of the unorganized workforce, the informal economy, and only the meager remaining 7% talks about the concept of organized workforce. I just want to take you to the legal labor standards internationally from the known premise. So what exactly is there in existence for the Indian workforce? As a law student, naturally, you'll be studying about the Constitution of India, which is the dream of an Indian citizen, which is the Bible. And it talks to you about a whole lot of articles, whole lot of provisions, specifically in the context of workers. But interestingly, let me tell you, it's very interesting to know that why the workers are talking about or claiming about their rights. Because it gives them a political or a moral space that they're asking for so that they can voice their concerns. They need not be exploited. They need not be into hazardous working conditions. They need not be discriminated at the work sites, and so on and so forth. So over centuries, there had been many rights that had been contested for the workers. right not to be discriminated, right not to be exploited, right to equality, right to working conditions, welfare conditions, social security measures, what not. But very often, think about, just to put you and give an idea of how the scenario looks like. Think about a world without work, when you are not paid, when you are discriminated, when you don't get effectively paid, and when you are into hazardous situations of work site, when discrimination happens, exploitation happens, physical abuse and sexual assault and what not, everything exploitative and horrendous happens to the workers or to you. This is the situation wherein, when we talk about the international labor standards, ILO has its own momentous activities that it had come up with. And it's only because of ILO, the international standards that had been there in place. And that's why we are talking about this. And that's why we get to know about the trade unions, we get to know about the workers' rights, etc., internationally. So when we talk about the origin of ILO, it's very interesting. Before that, let me take you to the Indian understandings. Since 1950, we had the Constitution of India. So Article 14, Article 16, Article 15, Subclause 3, Article 23 specifically talking about prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. Article 24 specifically prohibiting child labor less than 14 years of age. Article 39D, equal pay for equal work. Article 41, 42, 43, 43A, and 47. So majority of these directives comes within the Part 4 Directive Principles of State Policy. Understand, fundamental rights are always operational in nature and directive principles are aspirational in nature. That's where we need to come up with some legislation, some institutions to find out how it can be effectively be operationalized. This was just a slide for all the beginners to know about what exactly India has got for its workers. So understand, there was never a discrimination made between the citizens, the workers, and the others. All rights that are available to the citizens are always available to the workers. But when it comes to the human rights instruments, when you talk about Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights, even CEDAW's, a Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or Convention Against Racial Discrimination, Convention relating to migrant laborers and their families, all talks about the same kind of non-negotiables. Right not to be exploited, right not to be discriminated, right for equality, and the fair working conditions, and all the most the concept of decent work, the good work. And we are trying to look into the journey traversed by ILO with regard to the concept of work, decent work. And that's how I would like to put it before you. When we talk about the concept of ILO, the organization, understand it is the international labor trend setter in the world globally. So ILO was never coming up as only as a result of workers' claims or workers' rights. Never be under that misimpression or misunderstanding. It was always the result of the First World War and its aftermath. There was a whole lot of difficulties and pains and sufferings that the people had undergone, specifically with regard to war, the hunger, the starvation, the kind of black death that happened. Many of the workers were dying without getting medicines, without getting necessary health services and social protection. So there was a necessity to bring in peace within the global community. So in 1919, after the First World War, as a part of Treaty of Versailles, Part 13 of the Treaty of Versailles, ILO was established by League of Nations. So understand, it came up as a result of or an aftermath of the World War difficulties. Then it went on to move on to the understanding of how it can be looking at the concept of peace and justice, because from war we wanted peace. How can we cultivate peace? How can we develop peace among the member nations, among the countries across the globe? So that was the main concern. So ILO was established in 1919. India was a founding member, the founder member in 1919. After 2 years, India became the permanent member of ILO. And ILO mainly talks about, it is the center for normative action with regard to labor standards. It is the source of knowledge, it is a repository of information, and it acts as the guide with regard to the labor standards globally. So when I talk to you about what is the speciality of ILO, let me tell you, the one and the only UN specialized agency having a tripartite character. the one and the only international organization which survived both the world wars, the devastating world wars. That itself shows the uniqueness of ILO. And coming to the concept of ILO, how it works, when I talk about the tripartite character, it brings in the representatives of the government, the representatives of the employer, and the representatives of the workers. So there's a trilogy: the government, the employer, the worker. In consultation and in deliberation with these three actors, all the policies, all the programs, and all the plans, and all the kind of guidelines, everything has come up only on the basis of this particular trilogy, right? So as and when we move on to the understanding of what all are the different organs or wings of the ILO, you have the International Labor Conference, you have the governing body, you have the International Labor Office. So there's a legislative body, there's a governing body, and there is also the concept called as the International Labor Office. So what it does, what ILO does. So understand, ILO as of now has got around 187 members. Around 186 out of the 193 members of the UN are now members to ILO, plus the Cook's Island. So 187 members are there. So how it works, what does it do? It comes up with conventions and recommendations. When you talk about conventions, they are legally binding international treaties as among the member states who ratifies the convention. When it comes to recommendations, they are non-legally binding guidelines, and they provide you the guide with regard to how to implement these kind of conventions, these kind of ideas into the national context. So that's the relevance of conventions and recommendations. As of now, we have around 189 conventions and more than 200 recommendations coming up from ILO. On which all areas? That's very important. And that's very interesting too when we look into the concept of what all are the areas that are being brought in within the jurisdiction of ILO. It effectively talks about the collective bargaining, the concept of forced labor, child labor, equality, the tripartite consultation, etc. So mainly the conventions are divided into core conventions and priority conventions. So what do you mean by core conventions? Core conventions are the non-negotiables. You should be definitely be morally and legally be obliged to those kind of principles. Coming to the kind of the priority conventions, that is like the governance or the technical conventions, they have its own importance. When I talk about governance, it is all about the employment policy convention. It could be a tripartite consultation and employment growth consultation, conventions, etc. So core conventions and priority conventions on all these kind of subjects that you see within this particular slide. That is how the standard setting happens, either through conventions or recommendations. So what happens if when a member state accepts and ratifies a particular convention, that particular member state is obliged to go on with all those kind of obligations morally and legally. So what if there is a breach or violation that happens to any of these kind of provisions? Either the member states or the international governing body, the labor governing body, can take up the case, complaints with regard to such kind of situations. The matter will be looked into. There will be effective hearing given to the parties concerned, and based upon which recommendations may be given by the governing body. The governing body can even issue commissions of inquiry. So some of the prominent commissions of inquiry had made or compelled the countries to take care of and to be obliged with many of the labor standards, which are considered to be non-negotiables. Coming to once the recommendations are accepted by the country, well and fine. If it is not accepted, and if you have a grievance against that, you appeal to the International Court of Justice. So ILO constitution consists of 40 articles, but it's not about being or consisting of 40 articles. It's much more about than that. And that's where the principles of peace, principles of social justice, long-lasting universal peace concern comes in through this particular international organization. So let me take you to what was its ideology. Very interestingly, I told you it was the First World War that brought in the concept of how to come together with regard to the labor standards, and ILO was formed. So it says in the Constitution, it talks about in the preamble, the universal and lasting peace can be achieved only because of, or it can be only based upon social justice. So you might be thinking, what do you mean exactly by justice? So if you go by the understandings of the capabilities approach, the idea of justice by Amartya Sen and Jean Dries, they talk about remedying injustices. Martha Nussbaum talks about justice means remedying injustices. Very interestingly, you might have heard about the quotation, and injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere globally. Similarly, ILO talks about any nation which does not take care of its labor standards, which are not obliged towards its legal sanctions, with regard to labor laws, definitely poses an obstacle to any other member states which has the desire to promote the welfare aspects of its labor. And poverty anywhere is considered to be injustice, and it poses an obstacle for development anywhere. And that's how it is understood. The most interesting emphasis was given to the concept of labor is not a commodity to be exploited. That's where the whole understandings of how can we come out of such kind of situations had come up, whether it be with regard to forced labor or bonded labor or child labor, whatever be the situations. It talks about how can we come out of it. The one and the only solution that ILO has found out, the one and the only UN agency to look into this particular aspect, was the tripartite characterism brought to within the understandings of the ILO actions, plans, and programs. And to talk about ILO, it took its birth in 1919. India was a founder member, and by 1922, India became a permanent member. By 1926, there was the built office. The offices were built with regard to ILO near to the lake shore, the shore of the Lake Geneva. It had its headquarters in Geneva in Switzerland. And very interestingly, this is something of very interesting for anybody to look into how the ILO works. There was something engraved in a Latin phrase was engraved in the foundational stone of ILO. Do you know what it was? It talked about if you want peace, cultivate justice. That was the understanding, the meaning of that Latin phrase written over there on the foundational stones. Peace and justice are interlinked. Very interestingly, symbolic of how ILO works, there were three keys available to open the gates of ILO, something which is very much interesting, showing the tripartite character of the government, the employer, and the worker consultations that goes on, devising its plans and programs under the ILO umbrella. So that is how interesting you make it to understand you when you research into such kind of areas, how you make it interesting, and is much more kind of emotion comes into it. So now let me take you to the concept of what had been happening over the trajectory with regard to the 100 years. I told you the ILO turned 100 years by 2019. And this is just to bring before you how it worked and what all were the major milestones coming up. 1919, it was established. 1944, the declaration, Philadelphia Declaration came up, talked about the concept of labor is not a commodity to be exploited, adding on to the foundational understandings of ILO. 1946, this was the first UN specialized agency to come up in the labor field. Interestingly, 1969 and the 50th anniversary, ILO was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its work towards peace and social security. And for the first time, they came up with the idea of World Employment Program. 1960s, you had the situations of decolonization happening. 1970, the World Employment Program reached its heydays. 1980, you had the advent of globalization coming up. So it was very interesting to note the speech that was made by the Director General of ILO during this particular occasion when ILO received the Nobel Peace Prize. He remarked, there was always problems coming up before ILO. Whenever we found solutions for the problems coming up, again, unprecedentedly unforeseen questions were coming up. So we went on behind finding solutions for each and every concerns arising out of people, the living, the livelihood, the human beings within the society, the concerns of social justice. That was very interesting. Coming to 1998, as and when you see the advent of globalization, there was an awakening that was happening within the ideology of ILO, because it understood that the distribution of the profits of globalization had inequitably gone towards different countries and different actors, wherein the result was negative and restrictive action and restrictive atmosphere for the workers within. So this was a horrendous situation happening. So ILO thought about changing its idea to come up with a transformational paradigm shift with regard to how you look at the world at work. First, they started with the ideology of labor is not a commodity to be exploited. Now they wanted to look at it much more inclusively, with social inclusive concepts, with the concept of sustainability. They brought in the concept of decent work. So 1998 was very momentous for the ILO strategy when the Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work came up. So this was the very important declaration which brought in the concept of work from the world of work to the concept of decent work. It's not that you should have the work. Whatever work you're doing, it should be decent. And what do you mean by decent? Decent is all about you should be into a job, the precondition for getting income. You should be fully paid. The job must be of such character and it should be in such environment where effective working conditions are there, welfare conditions or welfare measures of the workers are taken care of. They are not discriminated. They are not exploited. Effective social security measures are provided. And all these came up. It should be sustainable, it should be productive, it should be fully paid. And that was how it should not be hazardous, it should not be discriminative. All these ideas came together to make the concept of work work or operationalize into decent work. For that, ILO had to decide on certain fundamental core conventions. So, 8 conventions out of the 187 conventions were taken as core conventions, fundamental conventions. And the obligation was made legal and moral. And that was the main importance attached to this particular declaration. I will take you to those conventions. And then moving on to 1999, the Decent Work Agenda, the ILO Social Summit report came up with the Decent Work Agenda programs. So the understanding of ILO is that it has the standard setting activities. It has got its technical activities also, technical assistance activities. So ILO sends us technical assistance to different countries and help them find out the needs of that country, the situation of the country, realize the situation of the country, based upon which solutions, plans, and programs will be jotted down. So that was the birth of Decent Work Country Program, DWCP. It happened in many of the countries. So understand, I'm not talking about the developing economies alone. I'm not talking about the least developed status countries. It even happened with the European Union. There had been effective cooperation happening by ILO with EU, with US. Understand, US is one of the most substantial donors for the kind of technical assistance that the ILO provides for. And many countries and many member states are a part and parcel of these kind of works. So if I can take you to the next milestone that was happening, specifically in the field of how the trajectory has come up through the 100 years. Then in 2015, the UN General Assembly set the decent work and the 4 pillars, the strategies evolved out of the decent work is to be adopted within the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. And the 2030 SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, is the place that we are trying to think about when we look into the future of ILO, how it works. So I will take you to that at a later point of time. Let me bring before you what all are the strategies to make the work productive and sustainable. So I told you the Decent Work Agenda 1999. It mainly talked about promotion of economic and human development. Understanding was that the human being's development should be focused. So decent work, what it did was that the Decent Work Agenda set or adopted the ideology that whatever be the programs coming up from ILO should be human centric. It should be economically viable, it should be socially feasible, and it should be made available to one and all in the same manner, in the same plate. For that, they had to come up with certain strategies. One, adoption of international labor standards and fundamental principles and rights at work. So if I can take you to what exactly are the international labor standards or principles of work, the rights at work, I'm taking you to a particular slide. This is what I have told you about the 8 core conventions and non-negotiables which ILO had developed and taken it along through the Decent Work Agenda program in whatever countries it had been working with. So understand, you have 8 core conventions. India has ratified out of the 8 conventions, it has ratified 6 conventions. So the recent ratifications happened during the year 2017. So freedom of association and protection of the right to organize convention, very much in tandem with the right to assemble, right to organize, etc. Right to organize and collective bargaining convention, These both first two conventions are not ratified by India. Then coming on to the next core conventions, the Forced Labor Convention 1930 and Abolition of Forced Labor Convention 1957. Understand, these two important conventions on forced labor are of utmost importance and the most ratified conventions among ULO, among the member states. Minimum age convention setting a minimum age, saying that within that prescribed limits only the child the work or the labor of the children should be made use of. Worst forms of child labor convention 1999. Equal remuneration convention, specifically talking about equal pay of equal value. And the next and the last convention talking about doing away with discrimination, employment opportunity and occupation convention 1958. In 2017, India ratified the worst forms of child labor convention, and the other one was minimum age convention. These two conventions were recently ratified. So now we are in the list of having ratified 6 conventions out of the 8 conventions. So what I talked to you with regard to the kind of rights the workers were claiming for over centuries are being reflected over here. Right not to be discriminated, right to equality, right against forced labor, right against the abolition of forced labor, the concept of worst forms of slavery to be abolished, the minimum age to be fixed, doing away with child labor, equal remuneration. So all these had been the main areas contested by the workers throughout the centuries, which culminated into the 8 core conventions, which has been effectively been emphasized as the fundamental conventions to be followed by all member states. And there's a rider clause, irrespective of whether these member states have ratified it. That's the most interesting part of this. So irrespective of whether India has ratified these kind of conventions, these 8 conventions, there is a moral obligation fixed by ILO to the member states to follow these internationally acclaimed labor obligations or standards. So that is very interesting when you talk about bringing in pressure to the member states, to the member countries with regard to such kind of labor obligations. So taking you back to our first strategy for decent work is over. The second one, decent employment and income. I told you, decent work is not about getting the work alone. Getting the work is a precondition so that you can be paid for that. Work should be there, fully productive and sustainable. It should be helping yourself and your family members. You should be paid well, for which your efficiencies be taken care of, your productivity levels are to be taken care of. You should be working within wonderful, effective welfare conditions. Working hours should be fixed. The payment of the wages should be fixed. The timely payment should be done. It should not be going on beyond years. But very often does happen. You should be working without any discrimination. Equal remuneration should be given when you are into equal jobs or jobs of equal value as prescribed by ILO. So all these are very much in tandem. It's not only about working, it's also about doing away with child labor. It is also about helping you during your rainy days. What do you mean by rainy days? When you are sick, when you have undergone any accidents, when you are into any occupational hazards or occupational diseases, there is often a limit with which a particular community can help you. Like earlier, guild associations were there. They used to help the workers take care of the welfare of the workers. But that's not possible. So that's why the concept of welfare state came up. So welfare state means the state can intervene into certain welfare aspects of the citizens and the people. So that's how we get to know about the welfare state activities as to how a particular country can help protect its working force with regard to certain situations. So that's why when you read through Jean Dries and Amartya Sen, the great Nobel laureates, with regard to the concept of protection and promotion. Protection means something that is given to protect you from falling behind certain appalling conditions. Promotion means an empowerment given to you, something that enables you to come out of a difficult situation of existence to a level of subsistence, right? So promotion is important, protection is important. And this is where the importance of Professor Amartya Sen's kind of understanding of capabilities approach comes in. So the deprivation potential is taken into account and the capabilities approach is to be taken care of. So this is the very important emphasis that should be given to social security and social protection measures. So decent employment and decent income. Take into account the women employed, take into account the children employed, take into account the kind of work that they're into, take into account the discrimination that they are into or they are facing. The third one is a tripartism and social dialogue, the most important of all the strategies. Whenever any decisions are being made, take care or make sure that the deliberations happen between the constituents of the ILO. Who are the constituents? The employers, the workers, and the government. So any labor decision should be coming out of, decision making should be coming out of this tripartite consultative process. That's very important. So ILO provides standards. ILO provides technical assistance to such kind of facilitating such kind of conducive atmosphere for the labor welfare and leading to social justice. The other one is social protection for all. Social protection, it talks about the schemes, the programs, everything that can be taken up with regard to making sure that you are not discriminated, you are not into hazardous jobs, you are not into exploitative situations. When I use the term you, it is all about the workers that I'm referring to. These are the four wings or the four limbs, I could call it as, with regard to how to promote decent work. Earlier, we talked about work. Now we have moved on to the decent work. Now we are talking about how it can be realized. The decent work agenda can be realized. I'm taking you to the interlinkages between the decent work and the sustainable development understandings. It's very interesting. I have given a segmented pyramid kind of pictorial representation over here. So understand, when I use the word decent work was not the term used during the formative period of ILO. It came up all around during the advent of globalization to make sure that the profits of globalization are equitably distributed to everybody, irrespective of poor and rich. Because there was a realization by the ILO that there is a social depletion that is happening to the social fabric, giving rise to more rich people and creating more and more of the disadvantaged, the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the poor sections. And that is how you need to look into. When we talk about the situation of workers, it cannot be equated with anybody and anyone. It's all about the humiliation that you undergo. It's all about the degradation that you undergo over a period of time. It's all about the depletion of productivity that happens. It's all about the depletion of efficiency that it brings along with it. It talks about not only of the worker along with the family members, right? So in this context, how will you bring in the understandings of decent work to the SDG program, SDG Agenda 2030? It's an agenda set which is totally talking about the concept of social inclusion, social justice. And the interesting part or the common thread of decent work agenda and SDG is that there's a common trend of human centric approach. Humans and planet is brought into the center, made the focal center, wherein we will be looking into the kind of or devising the programs and the plans, the procedures, practices, and standards. So there's an interlinkage between the decent work program and SDG. Goal 8, it has got 17 sustainable goals and it has got different targets. Goal 8 is very much specific when it comes to SDG: sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work to all. So decent work is again emphasized over under the SDGs. So understand, it's not only goal 8 that gives you the understanding of decent work. Goal 1 talks about reduction of poverty. It's very much related to what we are talking about. Goal 2, Goal 3, Goal 4, Goal 5, and almost all the major targets set within Agenda 2030 is very much in relation to the concept of workers, migration, climate change. Think about the situation when the migration happens because of climatic disasters or environmental disasters. How the decent work can be made operationalized, realized for such kind of people. So all these are the main concerns coming up. So when we divide into different segments within a pyramid as to what exactly do we mean by decent work, I have already talked about it. But just to give an understanding, to provide the workers with the jobs of acceptable quality, that is very important. What do you mean by acceptable quality? Understand, the work that I'm talking about is all about 3 Ds: dirty, dangerous, and degrading. It could be manual scavenging, it could be domestic help, it could be a construction work which is highly dangerous with regard to as far as a worker is concerned. So degrading, dirty, and dangerous jobs. All these workers should be given a level above a status wherein they are considered to be human beings with having the right to life with dignity, human dignity. Sometimes it is not possible. So think about the casteism that operates within a national system. Think about the other actors. Think about the other kind of schemes that are the discriminative schemes that are there, which talks about the kind of discrimination that happens. There is always a discrimination that happens between the male workforce, the female workforce, the local workforce, the migrant workforce, the regular workforce, the casual workforce, right? So this discrimination is going on, spiraling up. And that's where the decent work talks about jobs of acceptable quality. Fair working conditions. What do you mean by that? Without any hazards? Even if you are into any industrial, say for example, occupational diseases or situations wherein you are being exploited, the way out should be made clear. So the working conditions should be fair and it should be promoting social justice, fair and equal treatment at work, whether be local or a migrant worker, whether be a regular or a casual worker, fair and equal treatment to be meted out to them, training and development opportunities to be shared with them. That's very important. Updation of skills, the skill upgradation is one of the major areas that had been taken up by ILO around its member states and those countries which required assistance of ILO. Then the other concept comes up with the concept of decent remuneration. So you should have the work first and it should be decently remunerated. It's not like going less than a particular level. That's where you get to know about Minimum Wages Act in India. 1948 Minimum Wages Act. It talks about a particular machinery. It talks about a particular institution which talks about fixing minimum wages for the scheduled employments, right? So those occupations or processes coming within the scheduled employments, minimum wages are being assured. PODR versus Union of India, a wonderful case coming up from the Supreme Court of India, which talks about a proactive case, which talks about anything paid less than the minimum wages is violation of Article 21, right to life, right to live with dignity. Bandhva Mukti Morcha, another famous case coming up. You have the MC Mehta's case coming from the firecracker industry hazard that happened, the accident that happened within Shivkashi in the state of Tamil Nadu. Many judicial decisions had come up talking about the proactively with regard to what exactly do you mean by fair working conditions with regard to workers involved in over there. Protection against unemployment. So unemployment allowances. When you talk about ESI Act, you have the Rajiv Gandhi Kalyan Shramik Yojana. It's an unemployment allowance scheme brought in within that legal statutory framework. Access to salaried jobs or self-employment. So that's yet again a must, a non-negotiable within the decent work agenda. Safe working conditions. I talked to you about the construction workers, the kind of the high profile construction activities that goes on, and you might be seeing on your way to your school or college or whatever it is, your workplace, you might be seeing workers without any they don't have the necessary precautionary measures, or they don't have the necessary precautionary goggles with them, they don't have the necessary dress with them, the precautionary kind of dresses with them, so that they can survive such kind of potential disadvantages. So this is how we should look into the concept of the developmental aspect of decent work. It's all about a developmental agenda that we are talking about. And development is all about not only the improvement of GDP or the economic growth, social, economic, and environmental. That's where the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, talks effectively about how can you look into the program of decent work agenda. Here, this is just to bring before you the 2013 to 2017 Decent Work Agenda program happening in India, and also the newly announced 2018 to 2022 Decent Work program. I have brought in the examples of India here to make it very clear to you. So how ILO provides technical assistance to us with regard to these kind of situations, the micro, small, medium enterprises, the National Child Labor Project, Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, the major health insurance program within the scheme within the country, providing for social protection. You have national policy on skill development. I told you about the skill upgradation that is required. The NREGA, the 100 Days Employment Guarantee Program, which promotes employment, which talks about inclusive, sustainable growth, right? So this had been the 2013 to 2017 Decent Work Country Program of India. Now the 2018-2022 concerns have come up. So majorly, the most important fact will be that India will have to be protecting its workers from its unacceptable forms of work, maybe child labor, maybe bonded labor, maybe forced labor, or any other kind of discriminative and hazardous working situations. One will be promoting occupational safety and health. One will be effectively empowering or strengthening the labor inspection, and definitely the concept of tripartite consultations. And that's where the Decent Country Work Program effectively operationalizes itself within the umbrella strategy from the ILO. And interestingly, I am given to understand that I have the students from China and Nepal and many other countries over here. And let me tell you, and Sri Lanka. So when you talk about Nepal or Sri Lanka, they do have decent work country program starting from 2018 to 2022 going on. Coming to China, they have the 2016 to 2020 decent country work program. And it was very interesting to go through all those reports as to what all are the priorities set for all these kind of decent works. Same concerns: feminization of labor, tripartite consultation, strengthening of labor inspections, then the concerns of the OSH, definitely occupational safety and health. Even in the China, they do have taken concerns and priority with regard to that particular issue. Even India has, even Nepal has, even Sri Lanka has. So all these countries has its association with ILO with regard to promoting these kinds of situations. So what all are the major conventions to be looked into, which can be a guideline forward to promote SDG agenda and DWA? Now I have brought you all to a situation wherein I'm talking about decent work agenda and sustainable development goals together, right? This is how you should understand. Coming to ILO, what it can do, what it can promote. Yes, we do have social protection flows recommendation to 2012, Social Security Convention 52, Equality Treatment Convention 1962, and Maintenance of Social Security Rights Convention. These conventions have not been ratified, but from the perspective of social security and social protection, they are very important and very relevant, which all the countries and all the member states should be following up and ratifying this particular convention. And this has been effectively brought in the report, in the guidelines which have been brought in by ILO, guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and society, inclusive societies for all. So understand, I'm bringing in social concerns, economic concerns, and environmental concerns together here in the discussion, just to put before you, just to bring in before you the proposition that decent work agenda and SDG cannot be separated. They cannot be alienated with regard to its operationalization, right? On one hand, you have the SDG. On the other hand, you have the decent work program. Moving on to a very interesting slide that I have for you. I told you I will talk to you about the formative years of ILO, how it moved on to its 25th anniversary, doing away with the decolonization. A 1944 Declaration of Philadelphia came up. In the 50th anniversary, ILO was awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize. In the 75th anniversary, it had to face the advent of globalization. So, globalization was really a landmark development that was happening throughout the journey of ILO, wherein it had to plan, it had to relearn, it had to unlearn what it had done, it had to replan, review, reappraise, and reassess its working, and based upon which they came up with these decent country work programs, right? So when we talk about before going on to COVID-19, let me bring you two very important examples as to what exactly could be ILO doing. To just give you a solid example for that, see, you might be knowing about the state of Tamil Nadu, right? Other than Tamil Nadu, you have many states wherein you get to know about an umpteen number of cases coming out of forced labor. So there was a special in 2008, there was a special cooperation assistance brought in by ILO to look into the concept of forced labor, specifically in different clusters of workplaces in Tamil Nadu. And the two important areas selected by them was one was Chengalpet near to Kanchipuram district. The other one was the one with Tiruvallur, which belongs to the state of Tamil Nadu. Why these states were selected and why these districts were selected? Around 6,000 million family members of the workers were benefited by the scheme. They were all into debt bonding with employers from who had taken the money from where the money advancement had happened. And for such a long time, they had been generations after generation, they had been into this particular system. So one group was Irula group, that's very famous, very discriminated kind of group or sections of workers who were into drying. Drying rice operations, or they were into rice mills basically, wherein forced labor was there in existence. The other was a certain kind of Dalit migrants who migrated, of course, because of the recession that was happening with regard to the agricultural season and the kind of jobs that they were not getting. They moved out of their villages and they came to Chengalpet to work in brick kilns. So all these clusters of workplaces, the rice mills, the brick kilns, all of them were brought together. Effective capacity empowerment programs were provided. Effective social protection was provided to them. ILO took the support and the initiative of the local government and the regional committees with regard to how to promote tripartite consultations. And this particular bondage system was a situation wherein which was becoming less and less, and more beneficiaries were coming out of this particular program. It was a 2008 program. This was just to bring before you how ILO works and making use of its strategies. Interestingly, with regard to COVID-19, I will probably end within 3 minutes. This is the world of COVID, right? It is always told in medical terms that virus will not discriminate and it will be affecting you, me, and everybody, right? Let it not happen. I pray to God. But when it comes to not only from the medical terms, leave aside the medical terms, think about the social scenario. It discriminates, definitely. The impact of COVID-19 discriminates, and the most disadvantageous are the most unorganized and the workers within the informal economy. The impact of COVID-19 have been workplaces are closed, too much of closure happens, layoff happens, higher unemployment, lesser access to social protection with higher inequality budding up, disrupted training that goes on, the deaths of the micro, small, and the medium enterprises. The youngsters are locked down, and often they are called as the lockdown generation. The informal economy leads to poverty, which is the main concern that we are into. And the World Bank has said that around 100 million workers are into poverty. And this is how we need to look into the concerns arising out of what is the policy framework with regard to ILO in dealing with this particular situation. It talks about social tripartism. It talks about accommodative monetary policies. It talks about much more physical policies. It talks about much providing for welfare working conditions to the workers. It talks about promotion of decent work again. Once again, with regard to these kind of situations, again they have started their work. When it turned 100 in 2019, they were looking into what is the future, the world at work in the future. But now with the COVID-19 coming up, the ILO is into looking into how to survive. As it had survived the two devastating world wars, the globalization, now it will have to survive COVID-19 situation, providing its promotional works and assistance works to the people around the world. Institutional level best models are there, country level best models are there, educational strategies are very much required. There's a whole lot in need of allocation of international aids as between developing countries and developed economies. Focused ratification campaigns are to be done. Intel engages with UN organizations required. Understand, World Health Organization has come up with social determinants of health and decent work. Productive and decent work is one of the agenda provided over there. Country level measures are very much required. The ratification of conventions, which I told you about, the 8 core conventions, skill upgradation programs, indigenous communities to be taken care of very much effectively. That is one of the areas coming up. And then educational strategies to do away with these kind of discriminatory practices, promotion of more of labor intensive strategies, involvement of more human rights commissions, whether it be minority, scheduled tribes, or children. With all this overdosage of information, let me put before you a food for thought. Prior back to 1861, way back in 1861, Abraham Lincoln, in his first annual message to the Congress, he said, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could never have existed if the labor had not first existed. Labor is superior to capital and deserves much the higher consideration. When I started my speech or the lecture, I talked to you about the Latin phrase that was engraved on the foundational stone of ILO. And it was a Latin phrase that was there, which meant, if you desire peace, cultivate justice. And what is justice? Martha Nussbaum says, it's all about remedying injustices. And what exactly is all about injustice? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere globally. So with this food for thought, understand what ILO is doing. what it had traversed, or what all it had survived throughout the 100 years. And this is how you get to know about the international labor standards. With this, I will stop. Thank you so much, Professor Saurabh, Dr. Kranti Deshmukh, Bausab Yadav sir, for giving me a wonderful opportunity, and the coordination team who is there helping me with all these things, because all of us are learning the life through how to lead the life in an online manner. Thank you so much for this effective participation that I have been into. A wonderful thank you, Saurabh, for a wonderful day for us with Shantanu, yourself, and myself over here. Always the moments are very precious, right? So leave the moments. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there are some questions in the question and answer
Yes,
box.
yes.
Uh,
Definitely, I will take them
yes,
so that I will not encroach on Professor Shantanu's speech.
yes, yes, ma'am. Can you see, ma'am, in question answer?
I'm not
You can
able to
just
see. Let me try. Can you
Q
reach?
and A is.
Yeah. Let me see. I have two queries. Good morning, Madam. Rajiv. Hi, Rajiv. Does ILO take up individual international labor disputes? If so, how does ILO address such dispute raised by employees? See, Rajiv, the main concern is with regard to, or the main fact is that it's a tripartite body. So individual complaints cannot be raised, unlike like that of the UN. You might be talking about the CEDAW or any other kind of specific human rights instruments. Here, we don't entertain an individual concern or dispute. Basically, any member state who has violated any of the provisions of any of the conventions that they have ratified, the matter will be taken up before the governing body. The governing body will look into the matter, send it before ILO, and sorry, International Labor Conference, and then they will decide as to coming up with a commission's inquiry. And you might be thinking how the disputes reaches over there. It's all about the tripartite discussion that happens within the national system. The representatives of the government, the employer, and the worker will sit together, and they will decide on these kind of disputes and the matters to be solved. It will be sent before the commission. The commission will look into it, and based upon which they will give you the recommendations. If you're happy with the recommendations, well and fine. If you're not happy with the recommendations given, and if the member states, I'm not addressing anybody as individual, the member states are the parties, so they can take up the appeal to the International Court of Justice. So individual complaints procedure is not generally entertained. It's all about the tripartite addressing of the disputes from countries. It's all country specific and the situation specific the disputes within a particular country that we are addressing. What role does ILO play in non-compliance of core convention by MNCs? A very interesting question. I think Professor Shantanu will be able to look into this particular question, because he is a wonderful expert with regard to the corporate social responsibility. But let me tell you, but it's all about, see, when you talk about the ILO sanctions, it is all about naming and shaming, like you talk about the human rights instruments. So condemning them, condemning the practices, etc. So one way of looking at it, it could be to bring in trade sanctions with regard to such kind of employers or such kind of situations. So this is how it can be looked into, and imposing more and more of social corporate responsibilities so that employees will be obliged to such kind of situations, which will be more discussed in detail by Professor Shantanu, one of my dearest friend. Sai Kulkarni, a society has kept moving from different political systems, example monarchy to democracy now, yes. And it is said that socialism is a destination. In your opinion, how do you think labor laws will be changed around the world? Labor laws ought to change. There is no other way out. And with globalization, definitely we have understood that. With COVID-19, definitely it has become a realization for us. We will have to live with the concept of social justice. Labor laws will have to be changed. Coming to India, we have in air the consolidation of the labor laws happening. The code on industrial relations, code on OSH, the code on the welfare aspects, the code on social security. So all these are the major changes happening within India. But let me tell you, Sai Kulkarni, whatever be the kind of changes happening, it should never be compromising at the interest of the workers, for sure. That's exactly what is happening at COVID-19, when in Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Gujarat, and many other governments are relaxing on its labor obligations and compliances. It is to be going at the cost of the rights of workers, which is not definitely to be taken into in the sense, which is a serious consideration to be taken into. And that's why we need to look into it from the concept of rights of the workers. At no point of time, rights of workers should be compromised, because all of us are workers in one or the other way, and the works gives you the dignity to move on in your life, and that's exactly what you call as future, right? That's my take on that.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I hand over to Krishna, ma'am, for vote of thanks.
Thank you, Saurabh sir. I express my heartfelt thank to Dr. Anuja ma'am. Ma'am, thank you so much for a wonderful session.
Thank you.
I express my heartfelt thank to Dr. Shantanu Paul as well. My express my heartfelt thank towards Dr. Kranti ma'am for constant encouragement and support, and I express my heartfelt thank towards all the teaching and non-teaching staff of SCLC. And lastly, I express my vote of thanks towards all the participants. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Now, within 2 minutes, we'll start with another session. Uh, till then, I wish to share one video regarding a course to be conducted at Shankarao Savan Law College.